Hello everybody and welcome to Purgatory Ironworks. I am your host Trenton Ty, and today do I have a great video for you. I woke up this morning, I said, you know what I need? I need more hoe in my life. And as we all know, the old hoes, the heavy hoes, they get the job done. So today we're going to be forging a 1700 style hoe using traditional techniques. Now, I say that out of both sides of my face because we're going to forge weld this piece up. But then, because I don't have an extra striker here in the shop, I'm going to need to use the power hammer to do a lot of the manipulation of the blade itself. So you're going to have to forgive me that one little bit because it is Georgia, it is July, we are a few days away from Independence Day, and boy, it is hot out here and I don't want to die on camera. So, but you guys are going to enjoy this. This is pretty awesome. And when we're done with this, I've got a special historical treat for everybody that I think you're absolutely going to love. So let's get into the show. All right, guys, let's look at this original example. Now, this is one that came out of my collection. And whereas this is most likely more like a mattock, this was used for heavy work. As you can see, this bad boy is super thick. The construction of this piece is how most of the original hoes were made. There was simply a wrapped eye that was forge welded here, and then the bulk of this material was flattened out to make the particular tool. And as you can see, there's a large gap right here. Now, the thing is that you can mitigate that and you can make that a cleaner joint, but you've got to understand that these tools were made in mass for people in the fields. These were not pretty tools. They were made to simply do the job. And so any type of extra work was just absolutely wasted effort. But today we're going to do this in a little bit different fashion. I would bet you that this piece in particular was made from one piece of stock, probably a heavy end. This, what would become the eye, was actually thinned down and everything was wrapped, and you can actually see to one side where the forge weld goes. So it was just fused and then beaten down. We're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to make ours in two pieces. So we're going to start with some 2" by 1/4" stock, and this is going to be the wrapped eye. We'll heat this up. Now, I will cheat it a little bit, and I've marked this out. We're going to make some 90-degree bends on these ends just to make the wrapping and the forge welding a little bit easier. Once we've made that wrap, then what will happen is I'll come in and I'll actually use a fullering tool to fuller down and then spread this piece out. Now, it's not enough to make the blade of the hoe. We're just going to use this as a platform to forge weld on a larger piece of metal that can be spread out into the blade of the hoe. Now, I was hoping I had a piece of 1/4" flat metal out in the scrap pile, but I don't. So we're going to have to use a little bit of ingenuity here. I do have a piece of 1/4" angle iron, and flattened out, that should do the job. Now, interestingly, one of the things that I considered was something I had seen in an original piece. They had made the eye, but they didn't have a big enough piece of iron to actually make a full-size blade. They had some strips, probably some 2" strips, and they actually layered them. They actually forge welded and overlapped them to make the complete blade. So we are in good company when we're trying to scrap all this stuff together. So let's get started on making our socket. So guys, I've made myself some marks. You guys can see my mark right here, and I want to give myself some 90-degree bends. Now, I do want that bend to be sharp as possible. So that looks pretty good right there. We'll flip it around and let's do our second one. Now, one of the advantages of this piece, and it should go fairly quickly, is because we have stock size that's very close to our finished dimensions. Most of the pieces of antiquity, as I'm always fond of saying, steel came in one of 3 sizes: small, medium, and oh my God. And most of the time, when they were making tooling and things of this nature, they were starting with really heavy steel, and it absolutely affects how the finished product looks. Most of the time today, we start from the other side. We start with steel that is very close to the finished dimensions, and that hurts us a lot of times when it comes to actually being able to have enough material to work with. All right, guys, I'm ready for our second bend here. If you're noticing how my hammers if you're noticing how my hammer is striking, to make that nice sharp corner, I'm not actually hitting here. I'm hitting along these two planes. And then if I really want to true it up to the anvil here, a little bit of adjustment, make sure she stays in plane, and there my two bends. What will happen now is we're going to heat this center section, and we're going to wrap this around the horn of the anvil, bringing these two flats together. Now this next bend is going to be a little bit of a tough one. Now this is where a tool on the anvil, like a bending hardy or something like that, can really help you get started. I'm going to do this freehand over the horn, which I'm telling you is one of the hardest ways to do this. It's going to be janky, it's going to be rough. We're going to make it work, but just understand this is where a bending tool comes in and does a really good job. All right, over the horn here. Now I'm going to start this bend. And as I was mentioning earlier, it is going to be a tad bit janky as you try to make this work correctly, because you want these two folds to come together. Again, can be done, not particularly easy. Not too terrible bad right there. Okay, so that's a good place to stop there. I'm going to take another heat, and then we should be able to fold this on over. You guys remember there was some wise soul that wrote a book a while ago that said just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should do it? We're going to follow that advice today. So you guys saw when I'm working over the horn of the anvil, it's janky. It's not controlled. I am certain I'll be able to get that wrap eventually. But it's hot here in Georgia. So I did the smart thing and went and got our bending hardy, and now I'm going to show you how to use a bending hardy to do this wrap as well. Now you can use a bending fork with this, but if you guys notice, with one little push right there, everything comes together, and now I can true this up, right? Right tool for the job. All right, I'm going to move over here to the horn. I'm going to clean up that circle just a bit. And now I'm actually going to bring all this together. Just like that. Not terrible bad. Actually, it looks like doo-doo, but we're going to say it's not terrible bad. This is going to be just perfectly fine for our welding. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to open those two leaves up just a tad bit. I'm going to get them fluxed, and we'll make our first forge weld. Magic sprinkles, magic sprinkles. You know what's great about this? So this is this was a candle can, and so there's some of the wax in the borax, so it smells like cookie dough with my borax. All right, guys, this first should be a light set of the weld. Again, not killing it, just making sure that the weld is set. So she's looking good right there. And so now I'll come back in, reflux this bad boy, and then take a heavy weld and make sure she's well fused. When you're in the shop and forge welding, here's a safety tip. As our camera people just found out, that when you actually forge weld, it throws slag and sparks in every direction. So you need to make sure to have the proper PPE on, even if you're forging, even if you're just in the shop, because stuff goes everywhere, things catch on fire. Always be safe in the forge. All right, we've got a good welding heat. And I'm going to say that that's good enough for government work. Now, What happens on a lot of these other pieces is the historical ones that I have seen. What will now happen is that they actually come in and they will use a fullering tool to actually set this down and then flatten all of this out. Now, I say sometimes they use the fullering tool because I have seen it just where they start a beating and a hammering right there and just mushing it, which I think is what we're going to do. So we're going to take another good heavy heat. I don't know if I want to do that or not. No, I want to. So the problem is if you fuller that, and this is this particularly thin, it's going to have a tendency to flop over. So I'm going to have a steadier set down if I just do it without fullering it. Okay, we're going to do some experimental archaeology, and I'm just going to beat the hell out of this thing. Commence operation, beat the snot out of it. All right, looking pretty good. You can see that we have a really controlled squishing of the material. Now, by the way, if you were making logging goods, this is how you make a picaroon. But that's looking pretty good there. So what I'll do is just continue to work this down, and we want to get this into a flat that we can attach our other plate to. I'm not worried about the cleanliness of this joint right here. She's not going anywhere. So guys, let's take a quick look at what we've done. Now in that video, you saw where I actually twisted that piece coming off of there. And I'm going to tell you something. In many of the pieces I have seen, there is that distinctive twist. So the reason that you would do that is because if you're hammering straight down on that line, that weld line, it's going to pop. So with so many of these types of tools, I have seen that fold over to one side as you see here, which of course can be cleaned up. But now we have a platform to be able to forge weld on our blade. So what I'll do next is I'm going to take our piece of angle iron, I'm going to get it good and flat, then we're going to prep this bad boy. Now again, I'm going to cheat a little bit here because normally you would have another person in the shop that you would have one piece to forge weld heat, they would have one, and you simply put them together on the anvil, give it a couple of good smacks, and then it fuses. We don't have that here, so I'm going to use a tack weld to actually put the pieces together, bring them up to heat, and fuse them up, and then we can actually spread out the blade of our hoe. So guys, again, this is just a piece of angle iron, and I'm just going to hammer her into a proper plate. Okay. And that should be good enough for government work. So we'll take that piece. We'll take our hoe head. And I do believe I'm going to put this on the front side of it, and we'll tack it and then slowly bring this bad boy up to heat. Now, counterintuitively, the bigger the metal, kind of actually the easier it is to forge weld simply because it retains heat. When we're doing little thin stuff, it's a monkey, but as long as you've got enough thermal mass to really retain everything, you're cooking with gas. So let's get this welded up and we'll start our forge welds. So guys, we are welded up. I put a couple of really good heavy tacks. I actually tried to put them under the piece because even with the forge weld, sometimes you can see just the faint outline of a modern electric weld, and I want to hide all of that. I want an expert to have a difficult time telling that this is not an absolute original piece. So now we're going to heat it up, flux it really good, and hopefully set our first weld. This is going to be a slow process. I'm not getting into a hurry. If you didn't notice, this thing looks janky right now. Even the welds separate a little bit there at the handle, but the good news is because we're working with putty, if we're careful about what we do, we're going to be able to fix all of it, and it's going to look less like poo-poo when we're done. So guys, one of the other tools you need to have is this guy right here. If you've ever been doing extended forge welding, you guys hear that? Shout out to Fort Rucker. No matter how many damn planes you send today, we're doing this video. But back to the show. You need one of these guys because if you're doing a lot of forge welding, what happens is that you build up a lot of dust, and you'll notice that you just don't have a good as fire as you did when you started. So by actually scooping a lot of the coals around there and shaking them out, you can maintain your fire much better because you just don't have that dust build up. Okay guys, what we're going to do is we've got a good general heat right here. And what I'm going to do is set this piece down. Okay, she is looking pretty good. We're going to make sure and reflux her here. Okay, and let's see if we can't bring her up to our first welding heat. Now this is an exceptionally large piece for this forge, so I'm going to open it up. Now again, when you're doing these larger forge weldings, you've got to have a clean fire. If you've got a lot of dust and slag, you're not going to get the heat that you need. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to up the air pressure. I'm also going to make sure and jiggle around there in the bottom, make sure there's no slag in there, and really drive the temperature on this girl. So one of the keys to getting a weld this big is got to be slow up to heat. You don't want to burn the edges of anything, so you have to sometimes let it soak a little bit just to slowly, gradually bring the entire thing up to the welding heat and then go for the weld. All right, looks like we did in fact stick. But we're going to need another heat. I'm going to clean her up just a little bit. And we're going to go for another fluxing. We're going to take another heat. And with the 4th of July boom, we are nice and fused. So I am happy with that. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to go over to our power hammer, and I am going to start spreading this bad boy so that we can cut it back to what we want. So I'm saying she's a success right there. I am very happy. So good enough for government work. She's been thinned out. She's now at an appropriate place as far as thickness goes, so it's still that good heavy hoe that we're looking for. But now one thing that is bothering my OCD is where I put that twist in. It's a little off. So I'm taking another heat and I'm gonna go over to the horn of the anvil. I'm gonna clean that up just for professionalism's sake. And then we should be pretty close to being done. So let's go to the horn of the anvil. Yeah, that twist right there is not symmetrical. And of course, it's driving me absolutely bonkers. So we're gonna make it a little symmetrical. I'll come to the body of the anvil now. And all right, who's going to bet I'm going to drop it? You lost. Let's get this straightened up. And I know I'm driving the camera person nuts going back and forth, so I do apologize. You can see we're just a tad bit crooked, so I'm going to come in here and take one more heat just to straighten this up. And we should be close to good. One more heat. So we're not too terribly far off, but I'm going to give her a little whackage anyway. And now we're good to go there. We're going to slide this over the horn of our anvil and do a little rounding work. Now, one thing about these hoes is that they were tapered. They were meant to be a taper fit with their handle. So the front opening is always going to be wider than the back opening. And she's starting to shape up pretty good. Good Lord, it is hot in Georgia. Do you see me working? Do you see this sweat? However, all this effort led to our nice, heavy, thick hoe. This is going to do some work for you guys. It's pretty awesome stuff. Now, here's the deal. There's a lot wrong with this. Now, if you saw me struggling with this piece, that's because I've never done one of these. So if you, in like mid-sentence, you see me like stopping to pick a booger, because I'm trying to think exactly how I want to do this. This is heavy material. This actual bridge right here is almost 3/4 of an inch thick, and I'm doing a lot of this work by hand. In fact, to get in there, you really have to do this by hand unless you have specialized power hammer dies, which I don't have. However, being able to run a stick through this bad boy, it's going to do the job. Now, here's the deal. When I started studying ironwork from back in the day, a lot of the tools that I saw didn't seem like they had great craftsmanship. They had janky stuff on them. I'm like, man, I keep thinking of these blacksmiths as these incredible artisans. The fact is, the vast majority of blacksmiths were making utility items, and the only question on their mind was, did it function? And this guy right here is going to dig a lot of potatoes. So guys, I hope you enjoyed it. Now, if you appreciate these videos, if you see the sweat rolling into my eyes, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment. And if you really love us, please go over to patreon.com/Purgatory Ironworks and support us, because these videos are brought to you specifically by our Patreons. YouTube doesn't pay us enough to do this. It is your Patreons that make these videos possible. And a special thanks out to a longtime supporter, Mark Blosser, who has come back into the fold. Mark, I cannot thank you enough for the support you've shown over the years. Thank you so much. And guys, be safe, keep cool, and I will see you next time.